Then we have the myth that when the veterans came home, they were spat upon by the anti-war movement and generally abused. There's a whole book on that by Jerry Lemke called The Spitting Image, which shows that actually this never happened. And then the myth that for me really gets to the heart of the function of all these myths and fantasies in U.S. culture today is the myth of the abandoned POWs, the POW MIA movement, which was actually originally concocted by Richard Nixon in 1969. But if you go to the United States today, what you find is in every state, it's state law, all 50 states, that the POW MI flag must fly on public buildings, various places. I mean, here in New Jersey, it flies on the New Jersey Turnpike and the Garden State Parkway, on police stations, town halls. There are hundreds of thousands of these POW MIA flags flying all over the United States. Only one flag, other than the Star-Spangled Banner, has ever flown over the White House, and that flag is the POW MIA flag. The flag is on permanent exhibit in the rotunda of the Capitol building of the United States. If you go to the stock exchange on Wall Street, you'll see a huge POW MIA flag hanging over the stock exchange. And so there's this widespread belief. I think the latest poll indicated 70% of the American people believe that large numbers of American POWs were left behind after the war. I mean, this is a complete concoction. There were no POWs left behind after the war. And what is this all about? Why are these flags still flying? Related to that very closely is the way the POW has become the iconic hero. So that usually in past wars, the heroes of the war were people who engaged in heroic actions during the war, killed a lot of the enemy, sacrificed themselves. But in this war, the iconic hero is the prisoner of war. This is why John McCain was able to propel to the point of becoming close, frighteningly close, to actually becoming president of the United States. And I did an earlier book. There's a chapter in this book on this movement. I did an earlier book called MIA, or Myth-Making in America. And when that book was in final draft back in 1991, I was teaching for a month as a visiting professor at a university in Tokyo. And I thought I really understood this issue very well. I understood this myth and where it was coming from and what it meant and so on. I mean, this is my field. But then one night, there were three Japanese professors of American Studies who were also very, very interested in the POW MIA myth, why the POW had become an iconic hero. And they were asking about that, and they said, we find this very puzzling. We've looked at the cultural artifacts that really make this a hero, the movies, especially Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and the other POW movies, and we see that the POW has become this hero, and not only is the hero, but he's an iconic figure for the militarization of American society. That somehow he represents some force for militarism being dominant in U.S. society. And they said, that's exactly what we can't understand. Because when militarism was dominant in Japanese society, the last person who would have been seen as a hero would have been the prisoner of war. What did he do that was heroic? He didn't fight to the death. He gave up. So how does this work? Well, when they asked this question, I was completely flabbergasted. This had never occurred to me. And I guess the reason for that, I've thought about this for some time, is that one's culture is inside one's own head. So if there's really bizarre things about your own culture, you don't see that because it's inside your head. It's all familiar territory for you. So I went back and I looked at the movies again, and so forth, and I realized, finally I came to, I think, an understanding of why the POW is our iconic hero, is our representative figure for the history of the Vietnam War, and that is because the POW is the victim. So it allows us as a nation, as a people, to see ourselves as the victim of the Vietnam War, embodied, represented in this iconic figure of the abused prisoner of war. Well, that's the myths and fantasies. What's the true history here? Well, the true history, the true story is a history and a story of a people and a nation, and that's a story that's 2,000 years old, because that's how long the Vietnamese people had to fight against a number of foreign invaders to secure their own independence. For many centuries against China, the Mongols, after conquering most of Europe and most of Asia, attempted to invade Vietnam in the 13th century and were defeated in a 10-year period, despite having the most ferocious and indomitable military machine in the history of the world up to that point. Then the French arrived in the middle of the 19th century, turned Vietnam into a French colony, part of French Indochine, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And then in 1940, in World War II, when the Japanese arrived, the French government, which by then was the Vichy government, the collaborationist government, not only allowed the Japanese in, but the Japanese made the French still the governors of Vietnam as a French colony, with Japan just there as a supposedly friendly force. That changed in late 1945 after the defeat of Germany, and Japan declared that Vietnam was actually an independent country.